Yes, yes. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is another edition of Macedon Cast, and I do apologize that we have been for a couple of weeks. We have not been a little bit consistent as we are many of the other podcasts on the Macedon media platform, but we are here. Unfortunately, this episode, I was going to leave it for the beginning of April. Um, the reason for that is because it was supposed I wanted to go into wrestling, but taking an in-depth look. Now, by the time that you will be hearing this, you should already know that Scott Hall, formerly known in WWE when it was WWF as Razor Ramon, has passed away. And it is quite a little bit hard to push on that date of April because I wanted to do it in April because there's WrestleMania, so there's a lot of people like wandering around, what's the fuss on all of this, and there's a lot of things that go into wrestling and that goes into many of these people's lives that needs to be talked about. Now, Scott Hall's death was something that really struck me in a lot of ways because his original gimmick, by today's I feel too hurt on my butt standards, it's not. It would have never flied. It would have been really problematic in today's age. But funny thing about that is that I don't want to mess things up on this, so I'm gonna tell you in this episode how cultural appropriation help so many people and so many minorities with the Razor Ramon gimmick, because it started there. This is a white guy from Maryland. Scott Hall was born in Maryland, 1958, and this is a white guy from Maryland playing or doing a character who is actually a Cuban guy, because if you have noticed, the Razor Ramon gimmick was like a Tony Montana knockoff. So, but if you come and think about it, even Tony Montana character would have been possible in today's standards, because we're talking about an American Italian playing a Cuban guy. So once again, we're talking about people from another place doing a character from a person from another place. So it wouldn't fly by today's standards, and it's really sad because sometimes cultural appropriation is not in a mean way. Right? It's just that in the case of wrestling, it's like, oh, there have been so many racist gimmicks, or maybe a racist storyline. There have been that. And the funny thing about, not the funny, because racist storylines are not funny, but the particular thing about that is that those work all the way up through the 2000s and almost up to the 2010s. Now, in the way that the story Scarface was twisted, given because in the original movie it was an Italian guy, and then when Al Pacino stepped in, they made this whole twist using the crisis on Cuba, in which they were sending people to Miami. So it was an interesting twist on the story, helping it get more in a modern side of things. And even though we had really great actors at that time, most of the actors, especially the only person that I think that could have played Tony Montana, and this is referencing to the cultural appropriation thing, would have been Raul Julia. But he was careful enough because he did not want it to be typecasted. And so Al Pacino was the one who took the shot at it. Now, the thing about that is that in that time, even though we were rooting for the bad guy, it, the funny thing is that even though it was like the Razor Ramon gimmick was like an on the fly. Okay, you're gonna be like this Cuban bad guy. Have you seen Scarface? Okay, so that's what is gonna happen. It wasn't like, oh, let's think it over. Let's bring a focus group. Let's see if somebody's gonna get offended. No, that wasn't done in the 80s. Wasn't done in the 90s. And in what it is, the entertainment business is something that sometimes we need to be careful on how we go the distance on this, calling out people for shit. You know, I spoke it on the episode in which we returned on the Joe Rogan case, because in both cases it was like, okay, the things that he said, not the best things he said, especially on the N-word reference as well as the Planet of the Apes reference. Those were pretty much horrible things, and I acknowledge that. But you notice something on those videos, Joe Rogan had hair. So we have, even though we want to audit everything and we want to have an opinion on everything, the thing is that we need to keep in mind that human beings grow up, you know? Human beings, they do grow up. They're human beings, they do see things in some way when they're young, in some way in a certain age, and then you keep getting older and you keep learning and you become more you have more empathy towards people. So when the Razor Ramon gimmick came, there wasn't no bullshit like right now. Like everybody's like crying, "Oh, cultural appropriation." No, and I personally so glad that it never happened, because the thing is that I was a wrestling fan, but I was a wrestling fan since the 80s, you know, like WrestleMania, Cyndi Lauper, Hampton Lou Albano. Um, I did not want to say the name of Hulk Hogan, but he was there. And it's not that I'm not trying to acknowledge what he brought into the wrestling business, but it's just that the Hulk Hogan that most people grew up with versus the person that we have known that he is quite of a stretch there. Now, the thing is that in the early 90s, you had Hogan gone of the company, Macho Man was gone, there was not so many African American talent in the company at the time. Not to mention that the company, and I don't want to give the impression that WWE or WWF at the time they were racist. On the contrary, they did a lot of things. The territory in Puerto Rico up until Bruiser Brody's death was a benchmark and on how far can you push it. And you could see people like Ric Flair coming to Puerto Rico. You could see a lot of people coming to Puerto Rico, and there was not a problem. It's not like Vince McMahon was not hiring Latin American people throughout in WWF. But at the beginning of the 90s, there was an exodus. There was WCW with their open checkbooks, so there was kind of most of the roster on WWE was actually white people. So the fact that we did not know, because the whole Scott Hall thing, we knew it when the whole NWO thing happened. But since we did not know, me as I was around nine years old when Razor Ramon came out, and I was going through a lot of stuff. And at that time, I was also handling the divorce from my parents. So wrestling was my ultimate gateway, you know. And the thing is that Razor Ramon let me identify myself as look, there's a Latino there. So if there's a Latino there, that was the emblem, because that was the thing in which the character got so over. A character that was designed to be a heel, designed to be a villain, right? that he got so over, it was because of this connection with minorities, because there was no so many minorities at the company at that time. Even in both companies, they were pledged at the beginning of the 90s. It was, I think, one of the widest periods of wrestling, up to the point that you had to have a guy from Maryland pretending to be Cuban. But at that moment, it was magic. At that moment, it's not only served for Latinos like me, it just is also African American people started feeling identified with Razor Ramon, and that's why the character eventually got over to the point that he did. And I've seen on YouTube and many places a lot of ranking on the intercontinental champions, and to me, no, there's specific people that gave that belt like its grand honor. And ironically, before they were on WWE, they were a tag team. Sorry for that. And it was Kurt Hennig, who was known as Mr. Perfect, and Scott Hall. And they, to me, especially Scott Hall, because Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect character was really good, and in every sense of the way, and it glorified the title. But it wasn't until Razor Ramon gave it, because it was like the whole thing around it, it's an intercontinental title. It is supposed to be this title in which you give sort of a more broader representation, and it gave it that intercontinental feeling. The fact that a guy slash playing a Cuban guy, but it felt at the time, me being a kid, that it was a Latino being helming the intercontinental title at that time. In those matches, that first ladder match at WrestleMania 10 with Shawn Michaels, that was something else. Now, just a quick explanation, because it's the first time that I've talked on this podcast about wrestling, so there's a little bit of terminology here. There's the heel factor, heels are villains, and there's the face, who are the heroes of the story, or supposed to be. Because that's the thing about the 90s, that I grew up with this shit, and it's the fact that you had these guys who were billed as heels, and they got so over that you could not ignore that, and you had to work around that. And companies were having time, but it was the reckoning of the changing of times, as well as the change on wrestling. So what Scott Hall did when he was Razor Ramon, it was open this door. And a lot of people, they scratch their head and they say why he was never given a title shot. But like, not a title shot like the Intercontinental title, because let's face it, now it's a grown-ass man. The Intercontinental title's meaning, it was to give some meaning to the roster. It is like the biggest prize, but if you're in the mid-card. Mid-card guys are not guys like in the big roster competing for the World Heavyweight Championship, because this is another level. This is like a tryout level. This is a time in which you do not have a concept like NXT to explore the ground. The territories were already dead. So that was another thing that helped also the Razor Ramon character, because throughout the 60s and 70s, and also the beginning of the 80s, the wrestling was divided in territories. So when the 90s started, it came down just to WCW, which came from Georgia Championship Wrestling. It was a southern regional promotion that was injected by Ted Turner. That the purpose was like a personal scuffle that he had with Vince McMahon, but the guy liked wrestling. So there's also this other fact that it was in the 90s there was only two companies, so the rosters were really big. So adding titles was something that was necessary. Eventually, WCW came with the Cruiserweight Championship, which helped people who were not as tall as the main roster guys to get also their shot. And also, uh, an opportunity so that they could expose their techniques. So even though Scott Hall was at that time a mid, not I would not even consider him a mid carder. He made his way into video games. That's something that usually main rosters guy did at that point, because it's not like the games, the wrestling games that you have today, in which you can have the full roster on when that game was made. But in this time that we're talking about, it is a time in which you you could only put like 6 wrestlers on a game. So you're gonna try to put the people who are pulling up for the company. And I do not remember the case of WrestleMania, but I remember that in the case of Raw, that was one of the first games that I owned. I never had WrestleMania, which was the first, I think, like big major game on the Super Nintendo console. I had Monday Night Raw, and Razor Ramon was one of the characters there. So we're not talking about a mid-card guy here. This is a guy who was so big, who got so over. He was a main roster guy. And in WWE, he was like a glorified mid-card, but he broke through. And WWE did recognize that. The funny thing is that when he went over to WCW and NWO started, he was put on that position of main roster status. But then something that happens a lot in wrestling, and something, because don't worry, this is not going to be the first podcast that we're going to be doing on wrestling. We're going to do a couple more so we can explain the next point that we're going to talk about. Wrestlers, unlike musicians, athletes, or actors, they did not get paid as much. And if you don't have a savvy mind and you don't start doing some investments, you're gonna end up broke, because unlike in sports, there's some clauses in which you can get a little bit of money even if you get injured. In the case of wrestling, you get injured, it's over. There's no paychecks. There's no paychecks that are going to be coming in unless you are lucky enough to land a commentator position, and the people who are in those positions, they're tying it up. So it's really different. And even though you can have a main roster, not everybody, because automatically people see them as peers with athletes and actors and musicians. And the thing is that even though they are, and they're busting their asses even more than, not so much as an athlete, well, as much as an athlete, and risking themselves more than any musician and actor out there. So the wrestlers' work is really underrated on that part. And you're going 300 days around, you're traveling for 300 days. Even if back in the 70s and 80s you were doing it within the States, but you're traveling, you're sleeping on a car, you're sleeping on a plane. That's not actual real fucking sleep. That's laying your eyes down for a while and going from one place to another. That's not a decent rest that a body needs. You add on to that issues, you add on to that anxiety, the fact that you could get hurt, the fact that it could be over if somebody fucks up. And there's a lot of factors that go in when you talk about wrestling. And it is everybody, oh, they're demons. Okay, I sometimes get pissed with that saying like, oh, he had his demons. But no, the thing is that you're traveling 300 days, okay? And due to the steroid scandal and the change on the federal government on their own stance on steroids, because the funny thing about steroids is that they were legal all the way up to 1990. It was in 1990 that they were declared illegal. So after that, you have drug tests. And they were done before, but not in the way that they were done after 1990. So you're on the road. You have a family. You have to support and provide for that family. So you are on the road 300 days. You only have 2 months. You only have 60 days within a year to see your family. And they're split within the calendar. It's not that you have 2 entire months to see your family. It's like you have a weekend here, you maybe have a weekend or a week over here, and then, but that's it. That's it. And it is hurtful because WWE, even with the pandemic helped WWE slow down a little, but WWE still on this rigid 300-day schedule. Now, these are human beings. They may go to the gym, they may have a discipline, but they're human beings. And there's a thing that is called coping. So you could be coping with this on, okay, I call my family, I go to the gym a little bit, oh, there's so much weight, and this meditation, and this. Yeah, but that kind of bullshit does not exist on the 70s and on the 80s. So then the way that you cope being on the road 300 days is just fucking yourself up. It's drinking a lot of alcohol, doing a lot of drugs. That's the way in which you cope with that. Because there's no the whole plethora of bullshit that we have right now. That we have meditation, that you have healthy eating. Okay? There's nothing like that. And in some occasions, especially within the 80s and the expansion of WWE, which was WWF at that time, in most cases, and not even on WWE, even on the territories, you had to get a car and rent a car with a bunch of your peers, and you have to switch who's going to be driving from this point, who's going to be driving on the other, and and that was that. And you know, it wasn't always on airplanes. That's something that is a little bit more now. And there's some places in which the wrestler has to get there by car. And that's something because it opens the door to all of this maybe party, debauchery lifestyle. And it is something normal because we're talking about human beings we need it all. We're talking human beings who are putting their bodies on the line. And in the older times, it was even worse because fans, the whole fake thing was not widely known. So fans could get really infuriated, and there have been accounts in which in which wrestlers have been shot, they have been stabbed because they're believing what they're seeing unfolding into their eyes. So they're seeing X or Y guy as a villain, right? So getting back into the topic of Scott Hall is that he had some of those demons and then he exploded into the stratosphere. But he was coping with those demons. He was trying to provide for a wife at home with kids. This is not a Slash who was a single guy. He had a responsibility up to the end. And sorry for that. And the thing about that is that Scott, in the case of Scott Hall, on the late 90s, you could even see it. It was really sad. That was, in my case, it's like many fans on that era. It was like, okay, so this happened there. Watching, I used to, even though if Nitro gave the results of Monday Night Raw away, I was one of the guys that kept switching on the channels because there were some of the results I wanted to see unfold myself. Now, at the end of the 90s, you could see that Scott Hall was not holding it up so good. And he was drinking a lot, he was stumbling, he was falling in the ring. At one time, even WCW president Eric Bischoff had to come out because he was so much in a fucked up state. Lex Luger was pissed as hell. And the thing is that the thing about that is that it was really sad seeing a human being going through that because you grew up with this guy, so you're seeing him. It's like seeing a friend, somebody that you're looking up to, stumbling downwards, and it was really sad. So emotionally, it was so hard for me that I completely switched over to WWE, and it's really ironic because the man who technically, one of the men who took technically the WCW to the stratosphere, because let's face it. When WCW acquired Hulk Hogan, was like, oh, Macho Man, oh, but they were weighing down, and you were seeing the WWE product developing, and you were seeing a much smaller guys like Shawn Michaels, and you were seeing other guys like Bret Hart, one of my two of my idols as well. And the thing about that is that even though I was a kid, I understand that these guys entertained me when I was technically a toddler, so it's their time to move on. And you could even, as a fan on that time, you could even see WCW like this retiring home for so many stars. So at the beginning, before the NWO, I wasn't paying so much attention to it. I think that the only time that I tried to watch a pay per view from WCW, I think it was Dusty Runnels, who then became Goldust, who also the son of Dusty Rhodes, fighting on on a truck, on a moving truck with a lot of hail, and it was like, what the fuck is this? I was like, I couldn't buy into the product because it was so obvious that even for a kid, for a child, in my case, it was so obvious that this product is not yet developed. Now, when the whole outsiders thing started happening, now that was like an eye opener. This is like my idol from WWE. What the fuck is he doing on Monday Nitro? And then Kevin Nash popped out. Whoa, what's going on? And then came Bash at the Beach and the infamous leg drop from Hulk Hogan to Macho Man, and he officially being the famous third guy, and that changed everything. That completely changed everything. It was like they were on an even ground. That specific leg drop, when you see that leg dropping on Macho Man Randy Savage on that Bash at the Beach, that's the moment in which WCW came from being just a mere number two with a big checkbook to become a peer, a complete pair, balanced, complete other company, a complete full-blown out competition. Not a number two, but a number one rising against the number one. And it was Scott Hall. Ironically, it was Scott Hall's downfall that let me out of the product for a while, and I got completely invested back into the whole Stone Cold Steve Austin era, the whole D-Generation X era, and I went back to WWE. And a lot of people, they followed suit, because the unfortunate story of WCW itself is that it had one of the best talented, the newcomers roster. They are actually now legends, and they needed to go back and forward to find that grounding, and some of them may even have not even found that. And the thing is that I think it was 2002 or 2004, WWE had already acquired WCW, and they brought back the entire NWO. So it wasn't that bad, but it was just the three guys. It wasn't gonna be like a company within a company and somebody else gonna join. It wasn't. They could have worked it like that, because the thing is that years later, when WWE acquired WCW, they do this whole invasion angle. And even though you're actually bringing guys from WCW to WWE, actually with their branding and everything, and there's ECW, who what buds do, and they had the ECW branding, it did not felt as that company within company battle that it was the NWO against WCW, even though, as we all know, there were contracts and it was only WCW. But that level, that realism level that was given on that NWO era, could not even be replicated by the invasion angle. And even though bringing the NWO fighting just straight ahead with the biggest guy in the company, with the biggest guys on the company at that time, did not even come close to that feeling, to that nostalgia that we had on the 90s. So we were mostly left up with now there was no regional territory, so they were called indies. Now it was the indies. You had TNA, you had Ring of Honor, which had too many fucking rules that you couldn't even understand. And then it was TNA. At the time was not like acquiring a lot of talent, and it had really amazing talent within that company. But obviously, they could not even match by any means what WWE had become, because you acquired your competition. You become this huge monster. But the thing that you saw in wrestling at that time is that they got too comfortable with that position and they just laid back. And we have a new one, and we have a new one, and things got stale for years because they knew that they were a powerhouse. They were the biggest machinery of wrestling around the entire planet. So they did not have to do much because they were not competing against another company. Even companies, when TNA had that big push and even brought Hogan, Nash, and Hall, it could not match. It wasn't even a way in which they could start a new Monday Night War, because this started with the basis of that. That was a war between two billionaires. Now, you may be hearing this, and if you're a fan of wrestling and thinking, oh, but where does Tony Khan fall on all of this? Tony Khan is starting, so he has to justify a lot of the numbers. Recently, one of the BPs walked out of the company and is going to WWE, and that's something that I don't want to jump into conclusions, because in a way I feel it like a work, but in a way it could be real. That and it happened with Brian Pillman in the 90s as well. So the thing is that at this time, Scott Hall is playing with injuries, still battling addiction, still battling his drinking problems. He had a lot of problems going on, and you can see it on the matches. Even if he tried to get his act together, he not the same balance. He became a little bit more stiffer. Now, he kept on trying, and his presence was so big and electrifying that at one time you can technically see past that. And funny fact, in TNA, he was not the most fucked up person there. He was really coherent. He was really there, and that's a sad story when he was on TNA, because you could see that the guy wanted to do something great, that he wanted to work on something great. But the thing about TNA and Scott Hall is that it kind of never happened, because he was struggling, but he wasn't as fucked up as a Jeff Hardy or that dreadful last Macho Man match, in which he was in it. He was with Jeff Jarrett, I was not mistaken. Jeff Jarrett convinced him and Kevin Nash to wear like this Elvis kind of outfits. And the thing is that when you move forward, and it was in 2014 he was inducted, but then you see the resurrection of Jake the Snake Roberts, which a lot of people, they tend to brand it as a real 2-hour long DDP yoga infomercial. It could be for many senses, but it wasn't only the resurrection of Jake the Snake, because on the side story you had Scott Hall going through the same process. Scott Hall struggling with his body, because people tend to just signal, oh, he's drunk. No, that's the problem with wrestling here, because a person could appear to be drunk, but there could be also a person who has pain, maybe from a previous injury. So the thing about that is that Scott Hall was inducted, Diamond Dallas Page helping out so that he could get sober, and it was like a prize given to him for getting like his shit together. his first induction as Razor Ramon in the Hall of Fame in 2014, and then he was inducted again as part of the NWO in 2020. Now, at that time, you were not seeing Scott Hall. You saw Scott Hall that got back up. He made sporadic appearances, but he wasn't on that level that he was on the end of the 90s, early 2000s. He was really in a good place. And as many other wrestlers, he had his appearance. He could amass a little bit more money. And you saw that he was doing absolutely great. So, and then all of a sudden, he had this fall recently. And after the hip surgery, he had 3 heart attacks. 3. So that you understand the strong will of this man, he was put out on life support. It was Monday, March 14. And he was put out on life support, and he stood around 5 hours before he passed away. 5 hours after 3 heart attacks. Most human beings would die within 10 seconds or a couple of minutes. He stood there for 5 hours. And it's really hard for me still to, at this moment, to process those news, because this was one of my idols, and it was a character built out of an era in which we were not whining and bitching so much, because this is the problem. I could know a lot of kids that need a Razor Ramon right now, that they need that role model right now. Even though he was portrayed as a villain, but he's there. He's on those big leagues. But now, since we have this whole bullshit of cultural appropriation, now we cannot get that. We had to wait for a Latino who, in most cases, we have had good cases of good performers, disciplined performers, but come on, it's not, and we have good examples like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, and I can still talk about it. One of my favorites, which is from Puerto Rico, who is who used to be known here as Ricky Banderas. He has another name in Mexico, and he has a lot of names over there. But the thing about him, and one of my favorite wrestlers, Savio Vega. But Savio Vega, the thing is that Savio Vega and the Boricuas, they came filling the void of Razor Ramon. So you had to take over, to replace, because he was unreplaceable. It still is. So to replace that momentum of Razor Ramon, you had to bring you had to bring first 3 actual Latin Americans, Puerto Ricans. You had to bring 3 of them, 3, not 1, 3, so that they could try to fill that void. And it's not, we're talking about Miguelito Perez, Huracan Castillo, and Savio Vega, who are excellent wrestlers, who are excellent mic workers, who are excellent bookers. They exceed in every facet of wrestling, and you needed 3 of those guys to fill that void. So that's something that you have to think on. You needed 3 of those guys. And then afterwards, what happens is that you get this whole misconception, because that's the thing. It's not, I don't like to use the name minorities, because how many people are native in the United States? Around 200 something million, 300 million. In Latin America, we are 600 to 700 strong. But then we go over some certain border, and we are a minority. And we get squashed once again. And many people, what they do need is to look up to somebody. the whole cultural appropriation thing, I see. Okay, blackface may not be cool, but we're making so much of a deal of eras and times in which okay it was not good. And the thing is that most of the projects criticized on those era, and talking about movies on the 30s and 40s, we're talking about shitty movies in most cases. There was the I don't know if it was Uncle Tom or the thing that Disney did as well, but that guy was African American. That wasn't blackface. It was racist as fuck, but it wasn't blackface or nothing like that. And coming from the last episode, this is the point. Okay, television, radio, traditional media, they have their own outlets, they have their own enforcing options, they have all of that. Cool, fine, thank you. But you have to understand that people need entertainment. And not just the cool people, not just woke people, but all kinds of people deserve entertainment. Regardless of what they know, regardless of what they do, regardless of the way that they think, people deserve to be entertained, and people deserve to have a certain entertainment that is still tailored to them. Republicans need to have fun. We don't need them to get more uptight than they already are. Okay? And besides that, we also have this. We also have. Sorry for that. Just verifying something here now. And that's the thing. We need to. I don't know. Now the thing is like spreading into the internet, and it really worries me. Because right now I'm mourning what it was one of my childhood heroes. A person that I identify, even though he wasn't a real Latino, but he made me feel like there was a Latino representing me in the WWE at that time. And I did not feel offended. I don't know if Cubans got offended by his portrayal. Maybe some did. But he did a lot of good. He inspired a lot of people to push on forward, to work hard. Because even though he had the lifestyle that he pushed it on, and he gave advice of working hard. The guy behind the curtain, described as one of the most coolest reachable guys in the industry. He even managed to come to Puerto Rico a couple of times. And the thing is that he will be forever missed, and the things that he did, he was a pioneer. A funny thing, a pioneer that never held a world heavyweight championship belt. Maybe because of his demons, who knows. But he didn't need them. It's like Jake the Snake Roberts. A guy never had a belt. He didn't need him. It's not that belts are worthless, right? But the thing is that he didn't need it because he was a champion through the eyes of many minorities, not only Latin Americans. He was a champion for Latinos, for African Americans, for every kind of minority in the United States. A funny thing that we were almost portrayed as the bad guys, and then we ended up being who we are. And that's the beauty of the Latino identity. Even if someone else embraces it, there's these two peculiar cases. One by Al Pacino and one by Scott Hall. One guy from Maryland. I forgot from where Al Pacino is. I'm going to do my homework on that one. But the thing is that you got two guys who are more American than nothing else. Doing this cultural appropriation, they change history by taking what is now a risk because it would be problematic. Man, I even wish that he would have got a Puerto Rican gimmick. That's what that's something that we deserved after what was let happen to Bruiser Brody in Puerto Rico. We deserve to be painted as bad guys because that's one determined factor. Because people are, and fortunately in this case I haven't seen stupid ass comments like that. But the thing about that specifically is that one of the reasons that in which we did not have so much of a Latino representation, it was because the whole Bruiser Brody incident in Bayamon, 1988, it was such a mess. Wrestlers from the United States did not want to come here, and they did not want to do business with people that if they owe you money, they're gonna kill you. Okay? They don't want to do business with people like that. And who the fuck can blame any company in the United States? Not only WWE or WCW, but any company in the United States. So many wrestlers running in horror of the shitty medical services that were available. That was the Dutch Martell's pointing on the case of Bruiser Brody. Would have been on the United States, and I think it was kind of a complicated. Now, the thing is that that incident fucked us, and it shuts us away from the world. And the fucked up thing is that we kept celebrating the fucking assassin, and some people still fucking celebrating the guy right now, who never stepped in jail, who had 5 hours to get rid of the knife. He's now 70 years old. And Frank Goodish's son did not see his father. His father died when he was a child. And that's a burden that we still carry, and a lot of people, and you see the reports on others on other superstars, the Carlito, for example, who is an amazing athlete, but he had an ego problem, and now he's trying to make it out as an actor because a lot of people do not want to work with him. And that you get the thread of the whole Bruiser Brody incident and all of that, and how messed up the case was in the way that it was all sped up. Even Savio Vega, in many occasions, being a Puerto Rican, calling out the invader for what he had done, and many podcasts, and he has been really honest about that. And on what he saw on that day. And even though Savio Vega was here in Puerto Rico, he was not called to testify. The letter from that they sent Tony Atlas so that he could come testify, he got here months later after the verdict was handed down. And it was like a manslaughter. Well, that was what happened in a way. But there was a certain premeditation. The funny thing about Puerto Rico and the justice system in Puerto Rico is that there was recently a high-profile case of this guy who shot this girl in a marina in Fajardo. And the thing is that I look at the footage of that, and I saw the case. And the thing is that this is how justice works in Puerto Rico. The guy did not have any right to take that woman's life. Let's make that really abundantly clear before they take the clip from the next part. Now, even though he did not have that right, at the end of the day, what I was seeing is two drunk people fighting. One of them has a gun. There's a group of people that is with this girl that they did not do jack shit, and girl gets shot, girl gets killed, guy runs away. There's an accountability to that. But the thing is that the case was so emotional, and it was so on the scope of the media and everywhere, that a judge, I'm not blaming the clown that was the DA for that case, the judge ruled a premeditated first-degree murder sentence on that guy. But we have a guy in 1988 who calls, there's plenty of testimony saying that he called Bruiser Brody to the showers. There were people seeing, so he lured him into a specific area, committed the act. He was given 5 hours to get rid of the evidence, and he's a fucking national hero. What the fuck? That's Puerto Rico in a glance for you. That's why you sometimes, I do not like to mix things up, right? But we're going to talk about wrestling. We have a dark history. We need to address it in the way that it needs to be addressed. But that's how the justice system works in Puerto Rico. It got into this mix because a drunken argument, a guy gets premeditated murder without premeditation being proven. Because I'm not saying that he should have gone to Yale. He should have, totally. But 20 years sentence, 30 years sentence. This is a guy who could have gone on a manslaughter or at least a second-degree murder. But they gave him a first-degree murder because he did not have the money that the people that were backing this assassin, in which I refuse to say his name, not because of liability, not because I'm in Puerto Rico. I don't give a flying fuck. That's a guy that if I could have the opportunity, I would fight in a second and I would think about it, always making sure that he does not have a fucking towel in his hand. But the thing is that guy, a free man, going on his 70-year-old birthday, doing videos with trap artists, a fucking murderer. A piece of shit. Scott Hall only lives to 63 years, and that piece of shit still living on 70. And fuck the people who also help him too. Because the other guy that helped him, that is the father of the guy that I mentioned earlier on, is another piece of shit. He tried to write storylines in which he was the good guy and the young guy got heaped up. And he was repeating like I think it was Rocky 5 storyline over and over again, and he did not want to put people over, and he has been the champion. He has wrote himself like the champion in the storyline like 20 other times, and every time somebody that is not that, because the sad thing is that as any business, it relies on connections. So unfortunately, these motherfuckers are the connections with the WWE. Now with the rise of AEW, I think that could help the market get a little bit more broader. And I think that can definitely help a lot of things out. But keep the old fuck out of everything, please. It's really fucked up. So that's our episode, but you can trust yourself that this will not be the only and last thing that you will hear on wrestling on this podcast. We will be touching the topic. It's just that it's a little bit of a mix of venting out a little, and besides venting out a little, also talking about the appreciation and tribute. I will not call this a tribute to Scott Hall because there's a lot of themes. But the thing is that I'm really thankful. And this is speaking to Scott Hall. I'm really thankful for everything that you did. You let me dream. One of the reasons that I'm here is thanks to the inspiration that you gave me as a child and everything that you gave to me. And I'm really thankful for every beautiful memory that you have installed on me, for those great matches, those great promos, to make me feel through you that I was a part of it. You may rest in power. Thank you for everything, Scott Hall. And let's hope that this becomes a lesson on not to be shitty people trying to nitpick on everything, to feel offended. Let's see entertainment as what the fuck it is. It's just having fun. And you motherfuckers are putting too much rules on having fun. But in my case, I don't give a fuck because you cannot take my mic away from me. So thank you so much. This is Marcel Master and Cruz. Sorry for that line at the end, but a little of discharge here. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I will keep doing this. I hope that we could be a little bit more consistent. There's a lot of things going on, and which I will explain later in another episode. But I'm really happy, and thank you for the huge support. The base of Macedon is doing really great, so I'm really happy about that, and I'm really optimistic on what everything is about and unfolding to. Out of respect of Scott Hall, usually we started this year doing outro music. We did the intro because we have not done an episode on a while now. So what I'm gonna do now is that we are. I don't have a bell, unfortunately, but we are gonna give a minute. We're gonna give a minute to Scott Hall's memory. Thank you, Scott. May you rest in power. Thanks for everything. Take care.